After being reborn, the first thing I did was to go to the hospital to abort the child in my womb and then filed for divorce from Justin. I didn't ask for the custody of our son Ryan, nor did I claim any other property. All I wanted was a seaview apartment in a small coastal town. I decorated the small 3-bedroom, 1 living room apartment to be very cozy. All the utensils I bought were in parent-child sets. At first, Ryan thought all of this was prepared for him and he didn't care about it at all. It wasn't until he found that the pink children's room was filled with dolls and the wardrobe was full of beautiful princess dresses that he started to feel panicked. Both he and Justin thought I was sick, that I had gone mad. He burst into tears and questioned me, "Mom, I'm your biological son. Why don't you even look at me, yet you're so nice to the daughter you imagined?" He didn't know that it wasn't just imagination. I really did have a beautiful and well-behaved daughter. She lived in my memories of my past life. 1/2 a year after settling down in the small coastal town, I received a call from Justin asking me why. The process of our divorce was very plain, as simple as having a meal together. We both tacitly agreed that Ryan would stay with Justin's family, and we didn't get too entangled in the issue of custody. He didn't ask me the reason for my sudden desire to divorce and completed the formalities with an indifferent look on his face. I thought he didn't care, just like he had never cared about my joys and sorrows as his wife during all these years of marriage. Now, half a year later, he suddenly asked me why. At that time, I was hanging a portrait in the newly painted pink children's room. A woman was holding a little girl and sitting on the bay window. Outside the window were the blue sea and rows of windmills. The golden sunlight fell on the little girl's face, covering up her sickly paleness. I stared at the face of the little girl in the painting, lost in thought. Why? I wanted to say that we were supposed to have a daughter, and her name was Sylvia. She was very beautiful and well-behaved. Unfortunately, she wasn't healthy. 70% of congenital heart diseases can be detected during prenatal examinations, but she happened to be among the unlucky 30%. You had a brief moment of fatherly love for her, but soon you lost your patience because of her frequent hospitalizations and surgeries. You would use the excuse that the family atmosphere was bad and start staying out all night. When I was exhausted from taking care of her, when I was praying outside the ICU that the god of death wouldn't take her away, when I signed the consent form for giving up treatment alone and watched the doctor pull out her oxygen tube, you were out there having an affair with your mistress and even blatantly took Ryan with you, letting him happily call another woman Mom. But in the end, I didn't say anything. I just asked Justin, "Did you have breakfast with Miss Show today?" 1 year after settling down in the small coastal town, I saw Ryan. At that time, I had just come back from a trip to Xinjiang. I was walking home with a canvas bag on my back, looking dusty, when I saw the figures of the big one and the small one standing in front of the corridor. I subconsciously stopped in my tracks and kept my distance from them. As time passed, I seldom thought about this father and son anymore. They didn't like me, and my feelings for them had been worn away by the long-term disappointment in my past life. I thought that as long as I didn't deliberately look for them in this life, we would never meet again. Ryan was the first to speak. Although he was only 6 years old, he was precocious. His voice was childish, but his words were hurtful. "The school organized a parent-child trip here. Grandpa and Grandma said that since I'm here, I should come to see you. This is the politeness and grace that Justin's family should have." I nodded silently and said, He really looked a lot like Justin, not just in his delicate and superior eyebrows and eyes, but also in the way he looked at me with the same coldness. In my past life, when I broke down at Sylvia's funeral and when I climbed up to the 36th floor rooftop, that father and son looked at me with that same cold look in their eyes. Justin said, "Summer, don't be silly." And he also said, "Mom, don't be silly." Actually, 1 month after the divorce, Ryan had contacted me. He didn't know from whom he heard that I had moved to this small coastal town and deliberately made a phone call, telling me with disdain, "They said that after you moved to the seaside, you specially decorated a children's room and replaced all the daily necessities at home with parent-child sets. But I won't live with you. Don't waste your efforts." I calmly said, and then I heard him cheer on the other end of the phone. "Wow, Aunt Tina gave me a new game console again. Aunt Tina is the best." Then he hung up the phone in a hurry. Obviously my departure hadn't had any impact on his life. Compared with getting along with me, his biological mother, he had always liked those games more and also liked Aunt Tina, who always took him to play games and gave him game consoles. But now the coldness on his face suddenly disappeared. Those peach blossom eyes that looked so much like Justin's were filled with tears in an instant. He gritted his teeth and stared at me stubbornly. This time it was my turn to look at him coldly. In the end, he couldn't hold on any longer. Before the tears fell, he turned around and tried to run away, but then he tripped and fell to the ground with a thud. He lay on the ground for a while without getting up, just looking back at me. He had always been like this. Whenever I tried to get close to him, he would always put on an impatient face and say cold and mean words to show his dislike for me in every possible way. But once my attention was slightly away from him, he would deliberately fall down or pretend to be unwell, trying to make me feel soft-hearted and helpless towards him. But this time I watched him coldly and remained unmoved. He opened his eyes in disbelief, and his expression was mixed with confusion, puzzlement, and sadness. He burst into tears in front of me. "You're a liar, a big liar. You clearly said that you would love me forever and always be with me." 03 Justin frowned and accused me. "Summer, although the child is young, he actually understands everything. You shouldn't be so cold to him." He had a serious look on his face and his attitude was as condescending as always. It had always been like this between him and me. We didn't seem like a couple but more like an employee and a boss. Most of the time when he was at home, he didn't take the initiative to communicate with me. It was always me who took the initiative to report every little detail of life to him. Regarding things about myself, he was always indifferent. Only when it came to Ryan would he interfere a little. He would even scold me harshly in front of Ryan and the servants, showing no mercy at all. As a result, every time he showed even a little displeasure, I would unconsciously reflect on myself, be consumed by inner turmoil, and repeatedly think about what I had done wrong and what needed to be improved. Now, seeing his face again, I just felt extremely annoyed. "Have you forgotten what you said to me when we got divorced?" He said that he hoped I wouldn't disturb Ryan's life in the future. Ryan was still young and would soon get used to not having me as his mother, and that would be the best for him. That was the longest paragraph he had said to me during the whole divorce process. Now he took it for granted and said, "At that time, I was being too presumptuous. After all, he's your only child. Mother and son are connected by heart. He needs you, and you also." I interrupted him, "But I don't need him." Justin was stunned in astonishment. Neither he nor Ryan had ever seen me being so unyielding. It seemed that he still hadn't understood my determination when I left a year ago until now. Just like he would never understand in his whole life that Ryan wasn't my only child. I once had a daughter, even if only I knew about it. On the day I was reborn, I dreamed that Sylvia was crying. She also called me a liar. She said, "Mom, you promised me that you would live well after I left." Her crying made my heart ache so much that I promised her that this time, Mom would definitely keep her promise. I could only fulfill one of the promises I made to her and Ryan. 04 Once, my love for Ryan was no less than that for Sylvia. He was the child I gave birth to after going through a life and death struggle. He was the flesh and blood that fell from my body. I had once looked forward to his arrival so much. When he couldn't even talk yet, as long as he gave me a sweet smile, I could forget all the hardships and pains of being Mrs. Justin. At that time, I was willing to give everything, even my life, to him, as long as he could grow up happily and healthily. Justin didn't love me. The story between him and me was very plain. We were childhood sweethearts who hadn't found suitable partners when we reached the right age and were brought together by our elders. I had felt uneasy because of this plainness. When I was in school, I had witnessed with my own eyes what Justin was like when he loved someone. The young Justin was much more energetic and outgoing than he was now. Every time I saw him, he seemed to be smiling. He would smile carelessly when being reprimanded, smile with high spirits when winning a basketball game, and smile with joy when seeing the girl he loved. When his peach blossom eyes smiled, they curved into the shape of a crescent moon, like the warm sun in winter, making people's hearts surge and making people fall in love with him at first sight. At that time, he would send breakfast made by himself to the girl he loved regardless of the severe cold or sweltering heat, release sky lanterns for her, fill the playground with flowers, and loudly confess his love in front of everyone. So passionate and crazy. That girl was a straight-A student. She won prizes in various physics competitions all the way and skipped grades early to go abroad to continue pursuing the true meaning of physics. After that, Justin seemed to become indifferent to everything. Before the wedding, I asked Justin if we would really be happy. He answered me, yes. Love made me blindly ignore the indifference in his tone at that time. I comforted myself that people would always grow up and become more mature, and the way he loved someone would also become more mature. It wasn't until Tina appeared beside him, a young and beautiful game planner, that I realized that Justin only had one way to love someone. He began to smile when replying to WeChat messages, pay attention to lipstick shades that he had never cared about before, study women's perfumes, and stay up late with her to test newly launched games. When I was so worried that I went to his company because he hadn't come home all night, he was having breakfast with another woman and carefully peeling eggs for her bit by bit, a treatment that I had never enjoyed. At that time, I thought that it didn't matter if Justin didn't love me. At least there was one person in this family who loved me. At least Ryan loved me. At that time, I didn't know that actually Ryan didn't love me as much as I thought. This child would later stab my heart again and again. 05 That day ended on a bad note. Given Justin's and Ryan's tempers, I thought they definitely wouldn't come again. Unexpectedly, the next day, Ryan showed up downstairs at my house again with a small school bag on his back. This time, he was alone. When the property management contacted me, I was painting. On the beautiful prairie in Ely, a little girl in a princess dress was running freely. I didn't have any photos or videos of Sylvia. I was afraid that as time passed, one day I would forget what she looked like. So what I did most often was to paint her from my memory stroke by stroke, from when she was a baby to when she was 5 years old, the age when her life was frozen. I painted a lot, and they filled every corner of my home. But then I thought, how could my Sylvia only be in the hospital bed? So every once in a while, I would go on trips to take pictures of beautiful sceneries and then paint her together with these beautiful landscapes. I was painting this one a bit slowly. When I was riding a horse in Xinjiang, I fell and hurt my right shoulder. It was still a bit difficult for me to raise my arm, so I had been painting this picture intermittently for a month and still hadn't finished it. That was the first time I rode a horse. When I picked that white horse, the young man in the horse team hesitated and advised me that the horse had a bad temper and was unfriendly to strangers and had already thrown several people off. I smiled and said it didn't matter because that white horse was really beautiful. As a result, when our team was halfway through the journey, the white horse really threw a tantrum. It suddenly knelt down on its front legs and threw me onto the grass. Everyone in the team was startled. When the little girl's mother came to help me up, the little girl worriedly used her small hands to gently brush the grass scraps off my face and asked me sweetly in her voice, "Auntie, does it hurt?" Later, I took a lot of pictures for her and her mother. She reminded me of Sylvia. But in fact, in my previous life, the farthest place Sylvia had ever been away from home was this small coastal town. At that time, her health was a bit better, and I planned a family vacation. But Justin said he was busy, and Ryan said he wanted to participate in the testing of Justin's company's new game. In the end, only our mother and daughter came here. Those few days were quiet and beautiful. During the day, I taught her to draw in the house, and in the early morning and evening, we went to the beach to pick up shells together. She said that when she got better, she would like to live in this place for the rest of her life. So when I got divorced, all I asked for was this Seaview apartment. This is the home belonging to me and Sylvia, and it has nothing to do with Ryan or Justin. I didn't want Ryan to set foot in this apartment at all. Without hesitation, I gave the contact information of Justin and Justin's parents to the property management. 06 After just a few minutes, the property management called again, saying that when he was contacting Justin, Ryan ran into the community and disappeared. After all, I had raised Ryan with meticulous care. There was no way I could really let him get into trouble. I sighed, put down my paintbrush, and went downstairs to look for him. I searched the whole community once and was sweating all over. Finally, I saw him waiting at my door, with a look on his face that clearly said, "I knew you wouldn't leave me alone." I didn't say anything. When I opened the door, I let him rush in like a little lion, holding his head high and starting to patrol the territory everywhere. He asked me, "Which one is my room? You must have bought me a game console, right? I'm going to play games in the room." I didn't answer. I asked him to sit in the living room and wait for Justin to pick him up, and then I continued to sit in front of the easel and concentrate on finishing the painting. I had only painted a few strokes when I heard a loud noise coming from the children's room. I quickly walked over and saw the painting hanging on the wall above the bed had fallen to the ground. The frame was shattered into pieces, and the spilled fragrance liquid had smeared Sylvia's face beyond recognition. Ryan stood on the bed, looking at me helplessly. "I don't like this painting. Why did you hang someone else's portrait in my room? Why are you holding her in the painting?" I knew that maybe he just wanted to take the painting down and didn't break it on purpose. I also knew that he was still a child and shouldn't lose his temper over things he didn't understand, but my tone couldn't help but be a bit harsh. "Didn't I ask you to wait for your dad in the living room? Don't touch things randomly anymore." He sensed my restrained emotions, and his expression showed a bit of vulnerability. "In the past, whenever I broke something, you would always ask me if I was hurt first." I didn't answer. My eyes fell on the bed sheet that he had stepped on and couldn't help frowning. "Get down first." He still stood on the bed without moving, looking straight at me. "Mom, who is the girl in the painting you drew? Why did you draw so many pictures of her? Why is every painting in the house of her?" He was still too young to hide the fear and uneasiness in his eyes. He had seen all the paintings that filled the house. The girl in the paintings had eyebrows and eyes similar to his. "Mom, why did the guard uncle and the uncles and aunts living here all say that you don't have a son and only have a daughter? When I said I was your son, they also said I was a liar. Even when I showed them our photos together, they didn't believe me. Is this my room, right?" He jumped down from the bed and, as if to prove something, opened the wardrobe, but was stunned when he saw the princess dresses filling it. "Why did you buy so many dresses? Where are my clothes? Why don't I have any clothes?" He rummaged through the wardrobe everywhere and finally stared at me with wide eyes in vain, wanting to seek an answer from me that could comfort him. I looked at his eyes that were gradually filling with tears and didn't say a word. His tears fell down one by one in my silence. Suddenly, he went crazy, crying while pulling out the princess dresses in the wardrobe one by one and throwing them on the bed. He swept all the dolls on the bay window to the ground and unreasonably tried to assert his position. Why did you put other people's dresses in my wardrobe? I don't like dolls. Why did you put so many dolls in my room? I don't like this bed and quilt. This is a bed for girls. I don't like pink. Why did you make my room this color? Why are you holding another girl? Why did you hang the paintings of you and others in my room? I don't like her. I hate her. Hate her. This time, I couldn't bear it anymore. Ryan, get out. This isn't your room. There's no room for you here. 07 When Justin came to pick him up, Ryan said to him in a panic, Dad, Mom's gone crazy. She's been telling everyone that she only has a daughter. 08 When Justin and Ryan came again a month later, their attitudes became very cautious. Justin said, Summer, you're sick. He asked me to have video calls with relatives and friends and let them tell me that the daughter I painted, the daughter I told all the neighbors I loved deeply, didn't exist and was just my imagination. They took out the family photo album and forcibly pulled me to recall the past with them. But our past was too thin, just like this photo album that couldn't be filled up. There were hardly a few photos of the three of us as a family. Most of the photos were about Ryan's growth, with some photos of me and him mixed in. As he grew up gradually, perhaps due to a boy's nature, he got closer to the person in the family who had more authority and could provide him with better conditions. He understood Justin's indifference and alienation towards me and wasn't willing to take photos with me anymore. Now they were taking that photo album with hardly any photos of me in it, counting every little detail of the past, desperately trying to convince me that I had never had a daughter. I sneered, Are you saying that I'm crazy? Justin shook his head, No, Summer, you're just sick. He took out a surgery form, held my hand, and his tone was even a bit choked. Summer, why didn't you tell me that we originally had another child? I looked at him silently. Guilt and regret appeared on his face. Regarding Tina, I can explain. It's not what you think. He said that he just appreciated Tina's talent and paid a bit more attention to her. Being nice to her was just a means to win over his subordinate. His tone was gentler than ever. Summer, I know that you impulsively aborted the child and divorced me because you misunderstood the relationship between me and Tina. After that, you regretted it, so you imagined that you had a daughter. Summer, it's my fault. I didn't handle things properly and didn't pay attention to the distance between me and my subordinate, which made you misunderstand and feel sad and made you so seriously ill. In our previous life as a couple for 12 years, I had never seen Justin talk to me in such a humble manner. I stared at him curiously, as if I were meeting this person for the first time. You know, in my previous life, when I noticed something was wrong between him and Tina, every time I questioned or tested him, he would just coldly ask me in return, Summer, are you crazy? Even half a year ago, when he called to ask me why, he didn't answer my question in the end. Now that he thought I was really sick, he suddenly started talking and, for the first time ever, explained to me the relationship between him and Tina. He said, Summer, you're sick and need treatment. Let me and Ryan accompany you and take care of you, okay? I told him to leave with Ryan. 09 When Justin and Ryan came for the second time, they brought a psychologist with them. At that time, I had just come back from Mexico a few days ago. The doctor's surname was Lin. He took a look at my neck and spoke in a very friendly tone as if we had been friends for a long time. What happened to your neck? I raised my hand and touched the thin purple mark on my neck and answered casually, there was an accident when I was playing parasailing on the sea in Cancun a few days ago. That was the last stop of my trip to Mexico. When I was sitting on the parasail and being towed by a motorboat to glide over the sea, the rope connecting the motorboat suddenly broke. I was caught off guard and crashed into the sea from dozens of meters in the air. Although I was wearing a life jacket, the rope of the parasail got wrapped around my neck and tangled me with the seat. I couldn't float to the surface at all. I gradually lost my strength due to lack of oxygen while struggling and almost died in that sea. Fortunately, the guy driving the motorboat dived into the water in time to rescue me. Even now when I think about it, I still feel it was thrilling. Dr. Bo didn't ask further. He took a look at the painting on the easel with the paint still wet. Sylvia was sitting on the parasail, looking at the blue sky and white clouds and smiling. He politely asked me if he could take a look at my other paintings. After I agreed, he carefully looked at all the paintings in my house and then took one of them and asked me, could you tell me the creative idea behind this painting? It was a view of the water from an overhead perspective. Sylvia was floating on her back on the water, smiling and stretching out her arms, as if welcoming and trying to embrace something. I painted it after bungee jumping on the Gandaki River in Nepal. There were quite a few tourists going bungee jumping that day. They were either nervous or excited and sought encouragement from their companions or the staff. Only I had a calm face. The staff joked with me in English, saying that I didn't look like I was here to have fun but rather to commit suicide, and that he didn't dare to push me. He said that, but when he pushed me down, he didn't show any mercy at all. The wind during the rapid fall squeezed my cheeks and my eyeballs. The momentary sense of weightlessness made me feel as if I had gone back to the end of my previous life when I jumped from the 37th floor. Actually, the memories and sensations at that time were very vague. In just a blink of an eye, everything was over. But this time, the sense of freedom during the fall was so clear. When I was approaching the water, I had an illusion. I saw Sylvia's figure faintly visible in the water. She smiled and stretched out her arms to me, wanting to embrace me, but shattered into the sparkling waves of the Gandaki River at the moment when I tried to hold her tightly. I didn't answer Dr. Bo's question. Dr. Bo was very patient. He patiently guided me and tried to analyze the logic behind my behavior. Summer, when you aborted the child, it was just an embryo that hadn't developed gender characteristics yet. Why did you think it was a girl? Is there a possibility that you projected yourself onto it? I smiled. Are you saying that I'm narcissistic? No. Dr. Bo shook his head. You're feeling sorry for yourself. Is there a possibility that you transferred the resentment towards your husband onto the child? But after you aborted the child, you regretted it, so you imagined a girl based on yourself. Similarly, it's not that you don't love Ryan anymore. You love him too much, but you also took your anger out on him, so you could only pour all your love for him into this girl you imagined. But this little girl is too dangerous for you. He sighed gently. Wild horse riding, parasailing, bungee jumping. Summer, have you noticed that all the things you're pursuing are high-risk games? This imaginary little girl is luring you to test death. If you don't open your heart and accept treatment, the consequences will be unimaginable. Summer, I want to help you. Justin chimed in beside me. Summer, accept the treatment. Let us help you and take care of you, okay? Ryan also came forward and tried to hold my hand with an attitude that was more obedient than ever. I knew that Mom couldn't suddenly stop loving me. It turns out that you're sick. Let us help you. Mom, could you also draw a picture for me? You've never drawn one for me. I interrupted him. I did draw one for you. On your birthday last year, I gave you a portrait of yourself as a birthday gift. My academic performance since childhood was only above average and I couldn't compare with the kind of straight-A students that Justin liked. But I was very talented in art and was admitted to the best art academy in China. Unfortunately, my parents always thought that I couldn't earn much money just by painting. They hoped that I would get married earlier after graduating from the art academy so that they wouldn't have to worry about me and could immigrate to New Zealand with my brother without worry. I compromised. Because the person they arranged for me to marry was Justin. At that time, I thought that I could continue painting even after getting married, but soon I got pregnant with Ryan, and household chores and raising Ryan gradually took up a lot of my time. Whenever I wanted to calm down and paint a good picture, Ryan would suddenly start crying, and I could only put down my paintbrush to comfort him, so my painting skills gradually declined. Until Ryan's 5th birthday, I suddenly had an idea and picked up the paintbrush that I hadn't used for a long time and drew a portrait of him for him. But obviously, he liked the game console that Tina gave him better and just threw my painting aside. Later, I saw that painting under the small desk in his room. It had been folded into a small square and used to prop up the table leg. Ryan trembled and tried to defend himself. I didn't do it on purpose. I must have taken it by mistake. I smiled and exposed him. No, you did it on purpose. Because that day, you were dragging your feet and refused to take a bath, so I confiscated your game console. You did this on purpose to get revenge on me. You've always been like this. Whenever I don't do what you want, you'll hurt me by destroying the gifts I gave you and spoiling my good intentions. Because you know that I love you and care about you, and you know that I'll be sad if you do this. You want to make me sad. Ryan's face turned a bit pale, and he stammered for a long time without being able to say a word. 11. I looked up at Justin. Actually, I had already seen his hidden intention to make peace. For example, in my previous life, Ryan's school had never organized a parent-child trip. For example, Justin's family had so many bodyguards and nannies. How could they just let Ryan run out alone and not be worried at all? Another example is that whether in my previous life or after being reborn, he actually hadn't worn the clothes I bought for him for a long time. Starting from a certain day, he, who had never bothered about his outfits before, began to buy clothes and bring them home by himself. Later, I found out that all those clothes were bought by Tina. To make Tina happy, he never touched the clothes I bought again, and even changed his perfume to the leathery scent that Tina liked. However, these few times when he came to see me, he deliberately wore the clothes I bought for him and sprayed the woody perfume that I preferred. I just didn't care. I didn't care why he suddenly wanted to make up with me after a year. I also didn't care why he didn't just bring Tina into our lives directly since I had already made way for them. Because I didn't care, I didn't expose it. It's just that he had always been so arrogant in front of me. Even when he wanted to make peace, he couldn't put aside his pride. He only thought about using Ryan to make me feel soft-hearted and turn back to him on my own initiative. Now that he thought I was sick, it seemed that he suddenly found a step down that allowed him to lower his head to me. In an instant, he learned to be gentle and accommodating. As if because I was a patient, I had suddenly become a fragile item that needed his protection. All of his actions had a noble and selfless reason to be nice to me. He performed so sincerely that I almost believed it. Justin, you said there was nothing between you and Tina. Then why did you spend a lot of money looking for high-quality jade, carve a Buddha statue by yourself, and then kneel down step by step to complete the 99 and 81 steps of Nanshan Temple to ask the eminent monk to consecrate it just because she was prone to getting sick? Even when Sylvia was so seriously ill in my previous life, he, as a father, had never done such a thing for her. And why did you use overtime as an excuse to spend Valentine's Day with her? Why did you hug her and kiss her? Justin's face also turned ugly. I smiled and said, are you wondering how I know all this so clearly? It was your son who told on you. 12 The first time I heard about Tina was from Ryan's mouth. Suddenly one day, he began to frequently tell me how nice Aunt Tina is, what Aunt Tina and Dad did together. Mom, why can't you be as nice as Aunt Tina? At first, he might have been unintentional. But later, it was obvious that he did it on purpose. As I said, he was precocious. After realizing that I would feel sad every time I heard about Tina, whenever I did something that didn't satisfy him, he would deliberately mention Tina. I knew that he liked Tina and those games, but he might not really want her to be his mother. He just took pleasure in using the revelation of his father's intimacy with another woman as a way to punish me and fight against me. Especially after I had Sylvia in my previous life, his behavior became even more excessive. Mom is fat and ugly, not as thin and beautiful as Aunt Tina. He would casually say this when I was breastfeeding. Mom's belly is so loose and has so many stretch marks. Your clothes are so sloppy with milk stains all over them. You smell of milk. So disgusting. No wonder Dad wants to sleep in a separate room from you. When accompanying Sylvia during her surgeries and hospital stays, he would from time to time tell me that Justin gave Tina this today and accompanied Tina to do that tomorrow. He would excitedly tell me that Tina was so amazing that she designed a new game again and that he had a new game to play, not like me who was so useless. He would tell me after coming back from a business trip with Justin that he and Tina went to play somewhere and that others said they looked like a family of 3. He would show me the photos they took together in a show-off way and ask me if they were good. He thought he had hidden it well, but every time he said these things, I could clearly see the malice in his eyes. For the first time, I experienced what a child's naive viciousness was from my own biological son. He was like a devil, repeatedly chanting the spells in my ear every day that would drive me crazy. I knew that at that time, there were many boring relatives and friends who would maliciously instigate him, saying that after having a second child, I would only love Sylvia and not love him anymore. I also asked myself whether I was really partial between him and Sylvia, which led to his wayward behavior. But after thinking about it again and again, I was sure that I wasn't. Even when I was constantly on the go between the hospital and home for Sylvia, I would still ask Ryan about his well-being, carefully ask the nanny whether he had eaten properly, and help him check his homework. For his parent-teacher meetings, unless Sylvia happened to be having an operation, even if I hadn't slept for 48 hours in the hospital, I would still force myself to attend with my exhausted body. In fact, before Sylvia was born, he didn't like my company. He always thought I was nagging, annoying, and that I had nothing to do all day but revolve around him. He preferred to stay alone in his room and play games. But when I stopped revolving around him and put the attention and time that he didn't want on his sister, he was unhappy again that he could reject it and not cherish it, but I couldn't give it to others. 13 I didn't know who he inherited this selfish and bad nature from. It wasn't until after being reborn, when I didn't hesitate to leave Justin and Justin came to make peace in a self-deprecating way, that I was sure that he was like his father. That man who was busy having an affair and thinking about how to divorce me when I was exhausted because of Sylvia's illness and when my heart was torn to pieces because of Ryan's intentional stimulation from time to time. Didn't I want to divorce either? I'm not a masochist, nor am I a love-struck fool who couldn't live without Justin. But for Sylvia's sake, I couldn't. The treatment cost for Sylvia was not affordable with ordinary income. But if I divorced and left Sylvia with Justin, considering his attitude that he was more willing to spend time with Tina than visit Sylvia in the hospital, I couldn't be at ease. Moreover, Sylvia's heart disease might not be able to withstand the stimulation of family changes. So I could only grit my teeth and hold on. I had been thinking later, why could Justin love Ryan but not Sylvia? Sylvia was so beautiful and well-behaved. Facing the illness and countless surgeries, she always endured until she couldn't bear it anymore before crying. Even when she was afraid with only nurses accompanying her in the hospital, she always urged me to take more rest. She missed her father and brother and was confused about why they never came to see her, but she never asked or said anything. At such a young age, she was so sensible that it made people's hearts ache. It wasn't until after Sylvia died that I saw the divorce agreement that had been prepared for a long time in his study. Then I understood that because of her existence, he couldn't propose divorce to me. A man who was thinking about divorce from his wife when his daughter was struggling on the verge of death, how much public opinion storm would he and Tina face? He couldn't afford to lose face like that. He couldn't get rid of me, so he took his anger out on Sylvia. His indifference to Sylvia was seen by Ryan, and Ryan followed his example. Even though Sylvia liked him as her brother very much, he wasn't willing to stay in the hospital for a while longer to accompany his poor sister. Even when he was reluctantly brought there by me sometimes, he would just sit aside with his head down and play games. When Sylvia talked to him, he would ignore her. Even when I wasn't around, he would deliberately stimulate Sylvia just like he did to me. 14 The day Sylvia passed away was her 5th birthday. I deliberately called Justin and begged him to come home that night so that our family of 4 could celebrate Sylvia's birthday properly. The birthday present I prepared for Sylvia was a painting, the same one that I painted again after being reborn and hung in the children's room but was destroyed by Ryan. I held her and sat on the bay window. Outside the window were the blue sea and rows of windmills. The golden sunlight fell on her face, covering up her sickly paleness. Sylvia liked it very much and always kept it by her side, looking at it from time to time. But until it was time to light the candles on the cake, Justin still hadn't come back. I could see the disappointment in Sylvia's eyes. I hid in the kitchen to call Justin, but no one answered no matter how many times I called. When I returned to the living room, I was still thinking about how to explain to Sylvia why Dad was absent from her birthday when I heard 11-year-old Ryan looking at the painting with contempt and disdain and saying extremely viciously, "How ugly. Her face is as white as a ghost. In our school, girls as ugly as you would only be hated by others. No wonder Dad doesn't want to accompany you on your birthday." Sylvia's face suddenly turned pale. I couldn't believe my ears. Had Ryan always been speaking to Sylvia so harshly when I wasn't around? Ryan had grown up to this age and I had never laid a hand on him, but this time I couldn't control myself and slapped him. He covered his cheek, looked at me in shock, and shouted at me angrily, "Dad has gone on a date with Aunt Tina. He won't come back to celebrate this sickly girl's birthday. It's useless no matter how many times you call. In the future, I won't accompany her on her birthday either. Dad will divorce you and marry Aunt Tina. I will be with their family of 3. I don't want the sickly girl and I don't want you either." Sylvia immediately covered her heart and fell down. That day, when I carried her limp body into the ambulance, I prayed desperately that God could be merciful once more. But after the doctor's rescue, they still told me that Sylvia's physical condition couldn't bear another operation at all, and they advised me to give up. I looked at the painful Sylvia on the hospital bed, my mind buzzing, and I was extremely at a loss for a moment. I desperately called Justin, but he never answered. Later, I found out that he was in Tina's bed. Finally, I signed the consent form for giving up treatment alone, watched the doctor pull out Sylvia's oxygen tube, and turned off all the instruments. Justin was the last one to arrive at the hospital. Justin's parents, and even the people from the funeral parlor had arrived before he hurriedly came. He questioned me, asking why I didn't wait for him and why I gave up treatment without permission. I thought to myself, what was the point of waiting for him? Was I supposed to wait for him to get up from his lover's bed and come to Sylvia's hospital bed to put on a show of being a loving father so that others wouldn't say that he wasn't even there when his daughter was dying? Was my Sylvia supposed to struggle in pain for a few more hours just for his reputation? I looked at him and then at Ryan standing far outside the ward door. Their expressions were equally cold. One was busy having an affair when his own daughter was struggling on the verge of death and didn't even accompany her on her last birthday. The other viciously stimulated his own sister to death. Why could they still be so calm? Why didn't they shed a single tear? Suddenly, I felt that the father and son were so terrifying. 15 I know that these were all things that happened in my previous life. They haven't happened in this life and won't happen again. Maybe I shouldn't judge 6-year-old Ryan with the crimes that didn't happen in this life. But I just can't help it. I gently broke free from Ryan's hand and smiled at Dr. Bo. "Dr. Bo, you're wrong. The little girl in the painting isn't a dangerous existence for me. Justin and Ryan are. If one day I go crazy or die, it must be them who push me to madness and death." 16 When Justin and Ryan came for the 3rd time, their attitudes became very tough again. At that time, I was just about to set off for Iceland. I was just pulling my suitcase and about to enter the elevator when Justin, who came out of another elevator, stopped me. He threatened me, "Summer, if you still don't want to accept the treatment from the psychologist, I can only force you to be admitted to a mental hospital." I looked at him amusedly. "With what identity can you force me to be admitted? We're divorced, and you're not my guardian. We have nothing to do with each other, ex-husband." Ryan interrupted, "Then I can, right? I'm your son." I looked down at him and said, "Unfortunately, you're still a minor. They couldn't do anything to me." I turned around and walked away. Justin reached out to stop me again, but he pulled off the necklace around my neck. The necklace fell to the ground, and the lid of the pendant was knocked off, revealing the portrait of Sylvia that I had printed as a small photo. Justin stared at the small portrait for a moment and finally couldn't suppress his temper. Since you decided to abort the child by yourself, you shouldn't have regretted it. I clenched the necklace pendant with my trembling hand, not allowing myself to show any weakness, and slapped him back. He didn't understand anything. He didn't know anything. After being reborn, I had hesitated too. I had struggled too. But at the end of my previous life, Sylvia was lying painfully on the hospital bed, crying and saying to me, "Mom, I'm so uncomfortable. It hurts so much. If there's a next life, can I not come to the human world?" I really had no choice. I put the broken necklace into my pocket, didn't look at Justin and Ryan again, pulled my suitcase, and entered the elevator. 17 Iceland in winter has an extreme sense of desolation. The surging waves beat against the black sand beach, and the dark sand and stones formed by lava form a sharp contrast with the white waves. There are waterfalls, volcanoes, glaciers, and fjords on this small island, with numerous special landforms and wonderful landscapes. Due to its proximity to the Arctic Circle, the daylight hours in winter here are very short. The sun is always near the horizon, and the morning glow is almost seamlessly connected to the evening glow. The pink-purple Venus belt in the sky can last for a long time. When I came here, I brought a bunch of expensive photography equipment. After landing at Keflavik Airport, I rented a car and wanted to drive around the island to chase the aurora borealis. However, either the aurora KP index was below 1 on sunny days, or the weather was bad with thick clouds, so I couldn't take pictures all the time. On the last day of my trip, the weather forecast said there would be a snowstorm in the evening of the next day, and the roads might be closed for several days after that. So I had to give up the rest of my journey. I was unwilling to leave without taking pictures of the aurora. Although the aurora KP index was still only 1 that day, seeing that the weather was fairly clear, I decided to drive out at night to try my luck. I found an open wasteland in the wild and waited in the car until 3 o'clock in the morning, but still got nothing. Finally, I was so disheartened that I decided to give up. But sometimes fate just likes to play jokes like this. Just as I started the car and was about to leave, the aurora appeared. The green light bands danced brightly and dimly in the sky, changing unpredictably, beautiful and mysterious. I quickly took my photography equipment and found the place with the widest view to set it up and record this gift from nature. In the temperature of -10+°C, I couldn't stand the cold after standing outside watching the aurora for a while, so I decided to take a nap in the car and let the equipment shoot automatically. The necklace that Justin had broken was hung on the rearview mirror of the car. Sylvia on the pendant was smiling at me. Looking at her face, I also smiled and said, "Sylvia, look, Mom has taken you to see the aurora." 18 I lay in the car, watching the dancing aurora outside the window, and it took me a long time to fall asleep. As a result, I woke up a bit late and it was already dawn. At some point outside the car, a strong wind started blowing. The position where I set up my photography equipment was a bit far from the side of the road where I parked the car. The wanton flying snow dust reduced the visibility so much that I couldn't even see the place where I set up the equipment clearly while sitting in the car. I calculated the time it would take to drive back to Akureyri. Considering the snowstorm that would come in the evening, I decided to get out of the car directly and brave the wind and snow to collect the equipment. At that time, I didn't know that the time of the snowstorm in the Icelandic weather forecast wasn't necessarily accurate. It was quite common for it to be earlier or later than predicted. When I walked to the position where I set up the equipment, I found that both tripods had been blown down, and I didn't even know where the cameras had been blown by the wind. I groped in the snow, which was several times thicker than last night, for a long time before I finally found the cameras. I was afraid that the melting snow would damage the SD cards, so I quickly put the SD cards of the 2 cameras into my pocket separately. Not only was his father always in the business circle, but he was also extremely charming and had an extraordinary bearing. The car key of the car I rented didn't have a key finder button. I could only carry the 2 heavy cameras and tripods and walk towards the direction of the car by feeling. I walked for a long time, much longer than the distance from the position where I set up the equipment to the car. Then I realized that I had lost my way in the snowstorm that came earlier than expected. I tried to identify the direction, walked until I was exhausted, and finally had to throw away the heavy cameras and tripods but still couldn't find the car. I took out my mobile phone and wanted to call the rescue hotline for help, but found that there was no signal. I could only blindly search in the howling snowstorm. The raging storm became fiercer and fiercer. The biting strong wind, carrying snow particles, blew so hard that I couldn't open my eyes. I walked slower and slower. I felt that my body was gradually losing heat, and my limbs were so cold and numb. I knew that I couldn't stop and was just moving forward completely by instinct. Finally, I fell down in the snow. I thought I was going to die in the snowstorm in a foreign land. But I wasn't afraid. Instead, I was even a bit relieved. I said in my heart, "I'm sorry, Sylvia. Mom didn't want to break her promise to you, but Mom really can't hold on anymore. Actually, Dr. Bo was right. I was indeed sick. I had been sick all along. 19 After Sylvia died in my previous life, I suffered from a very severe depression. Or rather, I had already been sick long before I found out that Justin was having an affair, long before Ryan kept stimulating me, and long before I accompanied Sylvia through countless surgeries and hospital stays. Every day, I felt that the world was gloomy, and everything around me was full of malice. My husband and my son were so indifferent, and my daughter was so pitiful. I struggled and worked hard every day until I was exhausted but still couldn't see the way ahead or a glimmer of hope. But for Sylvia's sake, I had been gritting my teeth and persevering all along, always pretending that everything was okay, pretending to be fine in front of her, not letting her discover the cracks in the family and the ugly faces of her father and brother. Until Sylvia died, all the repressed negative emotions burst out suddenly and swallowed me up like an abyss. On the one hand, I told myself not to die. I had promised Sylvia that even if she left, I would live well. On the other hand, I couldn't help self-harming. At first, Justin and Ryan did feel guilty. They used a calm guise to cover themselves up, but they might not really be indifferent to Sylvia's death. People are sometimes so contradictory. On the one hand, they try to escape from their sins, and on the other hand, they can't help feeling guilty and wanting to make up for it. They, like I used to, pretended that everything was fine in front of me. Justin stopped seeing Tina, and Ryan stopped saying those hurtful words to me, pretending that we were a happy family of 3, but it was useless to me. I always remembered their equally cold eyes in front of Sylvia's hospital bed. No matter how much they smiled at me or were gentle with me, in my eyes, they were still so cold-blooded, so terrifying, and so hideous. They were the most disgusting monsters in the world to me. The closer they got to me, the more serious my illness became. I couldn't help crying loudly in the middle of the night, losing my temper uncontrollably, and hurting myself. Soon, they began to lose patience, started to think that I was an embarrassment, and began to think that I was a trouble. They reverted to their old ways. Justin started not coming home again. Ryan started speaking coldly to me again. The day I climbed up to the 37th floor rooftop, Ryan shouted at me impatiently, "It's all your fault that Sylvia died. It has nothing to do with others. If there wasn't a genetic disease in our family, if you hadn't failed to give her a healthy body, she wouldn't have been sick and wouldn't have died." Standing on the edge of the rooftop, I was stunned. So it was my fault. It must be that there was something I didn't notice when I was pregnant, which caused Sylvia to have a heart disease and suffer in this world. The thin thread that had been holding me back from death snapped at that moment. I jumped down from the 37th floor. 20 Depression doesn't heal on its own just because of rebirth. Even though I got a second chance at life, those negative emotions were still there. On the day of the abortion, I even hoped that I would bleed out all my blood on the operating table and just leave with Sylvia. But I dreamed of her. She was always crying and begging me not to die. I didn't want to disappoint her. When I got home and saw Ryan, they didn't understand anything. They didn't know anything. Only I knew everything about my previous life. Only I carried all the pain. Only I remembered their sins and their hideous looks. So I fled from those two monsters, Justin and Ryan. But it wasn't enough. Those negative emotions were still there. The pain and the sense of guilt were still there. I didn't want to break my promise to Sylvia, so I could only hold on to her tightly, rely on my longing for her, and repeatedly remind myself to keep my promise to her to fight against depression. So I decorated a children's room for her, pretending that she was with me. So I painted so many portraits of her that I was almost obsessed. So I traveled everywhere to enjoy the world on her behalf. I tried hard to pretend that everything had changed and was getting better. I tried hard to pretend that I was getting rid of the negative emotions. But I still couldn't help testing death time and time again. Every time I played those high-risk projects, I lied to myself that it was what Sylvia expected. But actually, it was what I expected. Now, the long-awaited death finally came. I felt calm in the blinding snowstorm. I slowly closed my eyes. 21 Beep, 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 beep. In the snowstorm with zero visibility, the continuous sound of a car horn suddenly rang out. That harsh sound pierced through the snowstorm and reached my ears, making me so irritated. In the constantly blaring sound of the car horn, I struggled with the gloomy and negative self inside me for a long time. I really wanted to give up. I really wanted to give up. But then I thought of Sylvia. Finally, I opened my eyes, struggled to climb up from the snow, and touched the tripod that I had thrown away earlier. I found that I had been walking around in circles all along. I used the tripod as a crutch and used my already frozen limbs to crawl with all my might in the direction of the car horn. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. When I finally found the car, I realized that the car wasn't actually far from me, at most 100 meters away. When I opened the car door shivering, how could I describe the miraculous scene I saw? No matter how many times I recall it later, I always feel that it was Sylvia's soul that saved me in the deadly snowstorm and guided me to find a way out. Because this was something that couldn't have happened. The heavy tripod on the passenger seat, perhaps because of the car being shaken by the snowstorm, tilted towards the driver's seat. The necklace that I hung on the rearview mirror somehow fell down and wrapped around the steering wheel, just pressing on the horn. Sylvia on the pendant was smiling at me in the constantly blaring horn sound. At that moment, tears streamed down my face. Epilogue: after getting back into the car that day, my mobile phone regained its signal. I called the rescue hotline, and half an hour later, the Icelandic rescue workers arrived and took me to the local hospital for a checkup. Fortunately, my frostbite wasn't too serious. After staying in the hospital for a few days, I returned to China. After experiencing that snowstorm, my depression seemed to heal suddenly. I had always known that this small coastal town was beautiful, but during the year I lived here, I had been living numbly and couldn't feel anything. Even though I traveled everywhere, no beautiful scenery could catch my eye. But after coming back from Iceland, I suddenly felt that everything here was different. The huge windmills in the distance were turning leisurely. The blue sea gently washed over the golden sand beach. The rays of light falling on the rusty old ship were so beautiful that people would stop to admire them. The world was no longer gloomy and had so many more colors. I still live here, still continue to paint, and still travel everywhere, but I won't deliberately do dangerous things anymore. I started to get involved in new media, posting the portraits of Sylvia that I painted and some photography works taken during my trips online, which attracted a lot of attention. Suddenly, I became a cutting-edge painter and photographer with a large number of fans. 1 year later, someone contacted me and wanted to help me hold an art exhibition. I agreed. The theme of the art exhibition was "An Angel Once Visited." All the paintings on display were portraits of Sylvia. On the opening day of the exhibition, surprisingly many people came. Justin and Ryan also came. Although I didn't pay much attention to them, they had actually been harassing me all along. After seeing that they couldn't force me to accept psychological treatment, Justin changed his strategy. Whether in my previous life or this life, during the period when our marriage lasted, he had never sent me flowers or any surprises. Now he actually wanted to use this trick to tempt me to remarry him. I scoffed at it. As for Ryan, every time he saw that I added something for Sylvia to the house again, he was extremely jealous. When I loved him before, he seemed to prefer those games. But now, no matter how many games Tina gives him, he will just tell her to get lost. Justin also fired her. Now, compared to games, he seems to want my motherly love more. He cried and said to me, "Mom, I'm your biological son. Why don't you even look at me, but you're so nice to the daughter you imagined?" Until a week ago, they suddenly stopped bothering me. I thought they were finally tired, annoyed, and gave up. But now they showed up at my art exhibition again. Seeing my guarded look, Justin showed a bitter smile. "You don't have to be like this. We're not here to cause trouble." He stared at the painting closest to him, Sylvia in the snowstorm, smiling like an angel. Justin's eyes suddenly became a bit moist. "Summer, I've been having the same dream these days. I dreamed that we had a daughter and her name was Sylvia." Ryan also looked at me with his red and swollen eyes from crying and asked, "Mom, I also dreamed about it. Is it true?" I looked at them coldly and didn't say anything. That day, Justin and Ryan watched every painting with red eyes seriously. The last painting took up the entire wall. Under the magnificent aurora in Iceland, Sylvia grew white wings and flew towards the sky. She was my angel, and she had visited. Justin and Ryan stood in front of the painting for a long time. Since then, they never appeared in my life again. Extra story: when Ryan was 11 years old, Summer remarried and soon had a daughter named Navy. On the day Navy was born, Ryan climbed up to the 37th floor rooftop and asked to see Summer. Justin looked at him impatiently and said, "Ryan, don't be silly." At that moment, both father and son were stunned. They both thought of that dream in the previous life. When Summer was standing on the rooftop, on the verge of falling, they also said to her, "Don't be silly." The blood splashing when Summer fell that day and Sylvia's paleness when she died had been Justin's nightmare that he couldn't get rid of for so many years. Summer's evaluation of him was right. He was indeed self-deprecating. He had always thought that Summer was too dull, too quiet, and too unnoticeable. She repeated the same things at home every day, wore similar clothes, and lived like a backdrop. It wasn't until after the divorce, when Summer left without looking back, that he realized his feelings for her. She was like the gentle rain that moistens things silently, unconsciously permeating every part of his life. Once she was suddenly taken away, it was as if a huge void suddenly appeared in his heart that couldn't be filled. He would naturally call her name when he couldn't find something. He would have the illusion that she was waiting behind him when he turned around. One late night, after he hugged the empty space beside him in a daze, his longing for her suddenly invaded all his reason like a fierce virus. He wanted to get her back. At that time, he didn't understand anything. He didn't know anything. He thought that he had hidden his affair with Tina very well. He could pretend that nothing had happened. Summer loved him so much that as long as he lowered his stance a little, she would definitely turn back without hesitation. He didn't know that Ryan had told Summer everything behind his back, nor did he know what he had done in his previous life. He couldn't understand why Summer looked at him with such cold and mocking eyes, as if he were something filthy. It wasn't until he had that dream. In the dream, after Summer's death in the previous life, he also had a sudden realization of his mistakes just like now and finally became aware of his feelings for Summer. Guilt, heartache, and longing, these intense emotions almost drove him mad. He knew that he should do something. He had to do something. So, he took revenge on Tina. He drove her out of the company, pushed her into a corner with no way out, left her heavily in debt, and even forced her to sell her body. In the end, she contracted a nasty disease and came to him with a knife. When she stabbed the knife into his heart furiously, she roared, "Did I force you to cheat on your wife? Did I force you to sleep with me? It's you, you're such a despicable person who can't control your lower body. Why do you blame everything on me?" When he learned that she was pregnant and gave birth to a daughter, although Justin was heartbroken, he wasn't as agitated as before. On the contrary, Ryan made a big fuss. But that day on the 37th floor rooftop, after both father and son were stunned by the words, "Don't be silly," that slipped out of his mouth, Ryan came down from the rooftop by himself and never mentioned wanting to see Summer again. They looked through Summer's Weibo together. A fan asked her, "Since you've painted so many pictures of Sylvia, why didn't you name your daughter Sylvia, but Navy instead?" She replied, "Sylvia is Sylvia, and Navy is Navy." Others might not understand, but Justin and Ryan did. Navy wasn't a substitute for Sylvia or an existence to fill the vacancy left by Sylvia. Summer was a good mother. She had never been partial to any of her children. Later, Justin donated half of his property to charity and set up a children's cardiovascular disease charity foundation. As Ryan grew older, he always repeatedly recalled that bad self in the dream about the previous life. Actually, although he liked games and liked Tina who could design games, he had never thought of letting Tina be his mother. At first, he just wanted to resist Summer's control over him in this way. Later, he just hated that most of Summer's energy was occupied by Sylvia. He was afraid that Summer would really stop loving him after having a sister, as those people said. When he was 11 years old in the previous life, he might not have been unaware that those actions of deliberately stimulating Summer and deliberately stimulating Sylvia were wrong, and he didn't want them to die either. But once mean words became a habit, they would always slip out. So he became very silent. After being admitted to university, he didn't choose finance but medicine instead, majoring in the clinical specialty of pediatric cardiovascular diseases. During every vacation, he would go to the children's hospital to do volunteer work. Both he and Justin were trying to atone for their sins in their own ways. Many years later, Ryan finally became a qualified pediatric cardiac surgeon. He spent almost every day in the hospital, either seeing patients or performing surgeries on them. He pushed himself to the limit, as if only by curing more children could he wash away the sins in his heart. Later, he met a 5-year-old little girl. She was very beautiful and well-behaved, and she had the same congenital heart disease as Sylvia. Ryan was her chief surgeon. The day of the surgery was the little girl's birthday. The surgery lasted for 20 hours and was very successful. Ryan walked out of the operating room with a smile on his face but completely exhausted and then just collapsed. His heart stopped beating and he passed away with a smile.